All right, it's going.
Chris, what was that you were just saying?
He's talking about sepulcher.
Yeah.
that AI probably gives us pronunciations based on our demographic, our geographic location.
Yeah, could be. Turn it into a southern version.
That's right. That's right.
The sepulcher. Or yeah. I don't know what the southern version would be, but
I think you can even get a GPS like that says you go down there a little piece and then take a right.
take a ride at the sepulcher.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Tim Hawkins has something like that with the redneck GPS.
That's right. That's right. It's good.
Yeah, I've seen some funny little short videos about southern folks giving directions, but it's always pretty funny. Me open my notes here.
If you get down there to Mr. Jones' farm, you've gone too far. You got to turn around.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's see. One thing we're gonna talk about some scripture starting with Luke 11:37. We'll get to that in a little bit. One thing that we were talking about before we started the episode was we're getting into some hot topics now. We were talking about Fort Knox and some high profile what used to be conceived as conspiracy theories, but some of these things are starting to look a little less like conspiracy theories.
That's right.
I'm not trying to be Mr. Jones here, but one thing that Chris and I were just talking about was or remind me, Chris, do you remember what we were talking about?
On what subject?
I guess the military industrial complex.
That's right. Well, as it pertains to COVID, 9/11, those kind of things. And about how the farther we go, most of these, quote, conspiracy theories, unquote, are turning out to all be proven correct, and they weren't so much of a crazy conspiracy theory as people made them out to be.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned the JFK files there a minute ago too. How much have you looked in and read into those yourself?
Now, I haven't read. I've read a few of the files that were presented on some of the other shows. Now, I haven't read deep into everything that there's thousands and thousands of pages. But,
that was.
But a few of them that were presented as evidence were pretty damning as far as the information that was contained on them. Like from some of them from different countries, some of them with pretty compelling evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald was indeed a CIA agent, and that he was, in the end, absolutely a patsy for things that happened. And I just don't think that you fight to have those papers not released, then they are released. And they are papers that were contained and controlled by the CIA, and now you want to debunk them even though they were yours. I just don't see how you do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And those of you listening, our listeners, what I would say to you is, I know that, yeah, there are conspiracy theories that can be kind of loopy and kind of crazy, but what you have to understand is our government is so big and so powerful, and not just our government. There are other governments that are large and powerful too, but when you get that large and that powerful, you have the ability to reach out. In the military, we called it reaching out and touching somebody. You can easily reach out and touch somebody, and that usually meant kill somebody or silence somebody. Much easier than any regular person could. And most, we all pay taxes, but because of the wealth that some really large companies have, other agendas can can slide into place and that regular people like us don't know about. Um, I'm not gonna name companies by name, but we all know or most of us know who our largest corporations are. So I'm not saying that the largest corporations are always to blame for these sort of things, but I believe that they certainly have a say in some of what goes on. And yeah,
That's right. Well, Kevin, it is in my lifetime. In my lifetime, I would have told you, and largely, I feel like it was so. But in my lifetime, I would have told you that the media was trustworthy. I do believe it's changed in a short period of time. But when you have people that are supposedly trustworthy in the media, in government, in these kind of things that you think you can trust, who come out and say these things that people are saying are crazy and that the people are crazy, it goes a long way in not spreading information or making people think that it's crazy. Even though they may know it to be true, all you have to do is discredit someone that way, and it takes a whole lot to overcome those accusations.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Things like you said earlier, things to me are not as big of a surprise as they used to be. Like you used to be when I heard some of the stuff, I'd dismiss it all as crazy propaganda or something like that. But I don't know. We've had some crazy, I don't know, pretty crazy past decade. I mean, world history is
Well,
always been,
you look at just what has been has been admitted to by our government in just the last several years. We know. In fact, we had congressional hearings over what some of the UFO things were, uh, or UPF, or maybe they call them the unidentified phenomenon or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. UAPs.
That's
I
right,
think are what
UAP.
they're
That's right.
called now.
We also know that it hasn't been just a couple of years ago that people would look at you crazy if you said that COVID was started in a lab. We know that now to be true. Uh, there were many people who would have sworn up and down that our government had nothing to do with JFK's assassination, and we know that to be untrue. Uh, and it just, it doesn't take a whole lot before you start saying, these three or four things that they've lied to us about, this is now, it's not just something that was a mistake, it's a pattern now. And, what else are they lying about?
Yeah. No, I agree. And another concern you mentioned legacy media a second ago. What I mean, what if we get to the point to where podcasts, like, I mean, hopefully we don't get to this point, but what if they started getting control over podcasts too? Then what are we gonna do?
That's right. Well, a lot of, now they can't control everything that comes out, but there are certain seemingly innocuous words that you can't even say on platforms like YouTube, or they'll just demonetize you, or they'll take your video down without telling you why. YouTube basically controls that now, and in a lot of ways they have kind of a monopoly over that because YouTube is so wide used. But as long as people who are fairly large in their audience, like Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson and some of these others, as long as they keep putting out good content that is that's trustworthy, that kind of gives credence to all the others, I think that it goes a long way in helping.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm thankful that they've been comfortable enough to speak out on some of these things because. And I mean, I'm sure, like we were talking about earlier, I'm sure it's a big part of the reason why Tucker was fired at his previous job or let go is because what I was telling Chris, to those of you listening, was that I think at a certain point, corporations decide that they are receiving too much heat and too much attention. And, I don't know for sure. I haven't researched deep into it, but I'm almost positive that that's probably the only reason they let him go. I imagine he had a lot of listeners and was doing really well. I doubt they even wanted to let him go. I'm sure they just felt like they were getting too much heat and they didn't have a choice, is my opinion. Um, but I mean, it's a shame for us to ever get to that point. We, you know, the truth isn't something that people should be afraid to speak.
One of the statements that Tucker made on his podcast today was that if you reach a point to where you know for a fact that you can no longer trust your government, you technically don't have a country anymore.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to think about, but he's right.
Yeah. I mean, if there's no accountability at the highest level of your tribe government, then yeah.
And I know these things are very hard for you to hear because you've been in the military and you've seen firsthand people put their lives on the line, and we find out now that a lot of the things that we may have been fighting for may have just been illegitimate, and it's kind of it's a disheartening thing.
Yeah, no, I think plenty. I don't know what everybody's reason is for PTSD or suicide or anything like that within the ranks of soldiers. People have their own reasons for their struggles, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out that a lot of them are due to them coming to these sort of realizations. Because, I mean, I spent close to 10 years in the Army, but imagine people that spent 20 plus. I mean, if you spend 20 plus years working for a government that you believe is good, and come to find out some of these things, I mean, I can only imagine it would set them on fire.
Well, Kevin, I admittedly, and I don't say this with just flippantly, but I used to think that all these kind of people who would say these kind of things, especially people who had been in the military, that kind of thing, who would bring up these things, I legitimately thought something was physically, mentally wrong with them when they would come up with these kind of things, and it's just disheartening that I guess maybe that it took me this long to start believing some of these things that we're finally getting a lot of evidence for.
Yeah, I mean it's just easy to get caught up in. I guess the only way I can think to describe it is like the group think, or like
That's right,
that herd mentality.
That's
just when it's much easier to be agreeable than it is to be disagreeable.
Sure. And like I told you earlier, my brain just doesn't want to think that our government would do these kinds of things to us. But there are too many people in high positions in control who only want what they can get for themselves. And it doesn't matter what bad they have to bring. It doesn't matter how many people have to suffer. And apparently it doesn't matter how many people have to die for them to get what they want.
Yeah. Yep. I believe that this sort of thing is exactly what the Bible was talking about when it said, money is the root of all evil. If you want money so badly,
the love of money.
Yeah, the love of money. I'm sorry, the love, and that's that's an important distinction that needs to always be made. But yeah, the love of money, if it can lead you to assassinate, or well, I'll just flat out say murder, because if it's an unjust killing, and we've spoken about this before, if you kill somebody and there's no justified reason for it, you committed murder. I don't care if you're some high level government employee, that goes for you too, as far as I'm concerned.
Or if you're a police officer.
Yeah, police officer. There's
military. It doesn't matter.
Yep. Yeah, if you kill somebody that doesn't deserve to die, you committed murder. And I mean that it's something that should be taken very seriously. But anyway, there's back to what you were saying earlier about that bothering me since I was in the military. The sad thing is it almost doesn't faze me anymore because I'm becoming accustomed to hearing and reading about these sort of things. So
And I just don't want us to get, I think we as a society, especially in America, have gotten to a place to where it's almost just accepted. When you hear things like this, that our government, uh, even through proxy, through CIA or through some other means, had something to do with killing our own president. I mean, that ought to be a sobering thing. I mean, several decades ago, people would have been in prison for that. And I'm afraid that that the acceptance is there so much that you know we can have all the evidence we want and literally nothing will be done about it.
yeah, we definitely desperately need more accountability. Um, I think a big part of the problem, and I mean, I know our forefathers tried to get us. Hey, you know what, guys? Hey, Tim, can you pause this for just a second, guys? I'm gonna take a quick break and fix my mic.
All right, we're good.
All right, sorry about that, guys. My mic was falling off of my side table here. Chris, what were you just saying?
Oh, about how you were just mentioning that you were I had mentioned that you being in the military, it had to be a little bit disheartening, especially with things you've probably seen and uh, your experience with people fighting for each other. And now, when things like this come out, you sometimes it's hard to know what you're fighting for.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, as a matter of fact, I got hurt right before. I was potentially going to deploy to either Afghanistan or Iraq when I got out and hurt my back and had to go to the hospital. And so that was, I did not, my military career definitely did not end the way that I was hoping it would. At that time, believe it or not, I very much wanted to go overseas and deploy. So that was, I think that was back in 2018. So it wasn't too long ago that I was still of the frame of mind of, soldier to the core. I want to serve. I want to go overseas. And I almost wonder now if that event that happened to me, if that was just God's way of saying, like, nah, I need you to do something else now.
Do you believe that if that hadn't happened, you would still be there?
Yes. Well, I know I would have been there longer. Would I still be there to this day? I don't know, but I certainly imagine I would have kept serving.
I mean, in the big scheme of things, it's not that long. It's only 7 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure I would have at least been in for a while longer. Would I have stayed all the way to 20 years or whatever? I don't know. But
And
I'll ask a controversial question. Would it have kept you in once they started mandate the vaccines?
yeah, that would have what's the nice way to say that? That would have had me very PO'd.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I actually I got at least one of them. I can't even remember. I almost want to say maybe I got the Moderna one, or I was lucky with whichever one I got. I think that it had the least amount of potential side effects or whatever. But
Yeah, I don't have a problem with them themselves, but if I'm told like you have to have this, then I have
yeah,
a problem with it.
yeah, no, me too. You know, I don't like. Yeah,
well, one good thing that Trump did. Now, again, you have to go back, but if you do go back, you do get that full back pay.
Yep.
yeah, yeah. Back pay, back pay would be nice, but yeah, I kind of like Tim just said. I wouldn't want somebody mandating that I mean, nobody ultimately wants to be told at such a small level what you have to do and what you can't do. I mean, that's, if we're a nation that's all about freedom, well, there's a problem there. And I don't get me wrong, I don't want people to say, oh, well, the same can be said for aborting fetuses, because I mean,
Yeah,
not that I,
different body involved.
yeah, yeah,
Well, and there was a few instances, and again, it was something that I at the time didn't want to believe was true. but there where we were told there's a few instances of soldiers getting immunized for different things, and they threw in the COVID vaccine as well without even telling them.
Yeah.
And I heard that that happened a few times.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely heard of some people complaining that they had to get it and didn't want to get it. And I'm sure that includes some medical staff too.
Yeah,
Or
that
mine.
happened in this city, like Jackson area. The hospitals were making employees do that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I thought I heard something about that locally at one point. Man, fear mongering, and don't get me wrong. I mean, COVID. We really did have problems from COVID, but turning it into this just mass fear and hysteria, we need to figure out some kind of way to stop people from doing that in the future.
Well, and Kevin, I think enough people learned enough of a lesson this time to at least have their radar up to not let things get out of hand like it did during COVID.
Man, I just to be able to laugh about it. I remember at one point I was looking up just images and little videos, and you would see some people wearing a mask. They'd be wearing a mask while they're by themselves in the car. They'd be wearing a mask while they're swimming in a pool. I mean,
Wearing a
it was
mask, jogging down the road by themselves.
yeah, it was wild. And I don't know. I guess, and I'm not trying to bash everybody that doesn't believe, but at the same time, I hope I would want to encourage you to read the Bible and up your faith. But I would imagine the only reason to get that scared is if you're, and don't get me wrong, I mean, nobody wants to die, but if you're just that terrified of something happening to you, it's irrational because any day that you walk outside, whether there's some biological thing like COVID going on out there or not, there's a chance any day when you walk out your door that you can die.
Sure.
I mean,
Well, and things like the churches and some of these other areas, well, it really every other area of life that was affected this way, where it was mandated that you couldn't meet. Um, the citizens should never let that happen again. Now, I think we do need to be smart for sure, but we need to never let the government or any government tell us that we can't meet anymore.
yeah, no, the right to assembly sounds like it should be an amendment somewhere for sure to me.
That's right.
I'm yeah, that sounds like that belongs in there as far as I'm concerned.
Which is why it is.
Yeah, or yeah, I was gonna say where. What is that? Number one is that in the First Amendment?
I'm not
free
sure
speech?
which bill. It's in the Bill of Rights. I'm not sure which one it is. But,
Okay, yeah, I was gonna. I was gonna say that sounds like one. But I mean, hey, here lately, it's like the Constitution doesn't even phase some people. So
Yeah, the First Amendment guarantees the right of people to peaceably assemble.
yep, there we go. So I always think of the First Amendment solely as freedom of speech, but there you go, right there. It also says that it's the right to assemble. So yeah, problem solved. um, but anyway, I guess we'll jump off this topic for a minute and talk about a few other things. One thing that I wanted to try to educate you guys in the audience about, if you've never heard of it, is a concept called Federal Reserve Banking. And what that is, or my understanding of what that is when you deposit money into a bank, not all of your money stays with the bank to be accessed by you. In order for the banks to continue to do business and make money, they must take a certain portion of that and lend it out to others. So I'm gonna see if I can give you.
and just to make sure, Kevin, did you mean to say Federal Reserve Banking?
No, that's a different thing. I mean the
No, no,
federal.
no. I'm saying that's what you said.
Oh
So I'm just making sure.
no, I meant to say fraction. Did I not say fractional? I
You said federal. Yeah.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, I meant to. Sorry about that, guys. I meant to say fractional reserve banking. So let me see if I can find a good definition. Well, I'll read off the Google AI overview. It says Fractional reserve banking is a system where banks are only required to hold a fraction of their total deposits as reserves, while the rest can be used to fund loans. This allows banks to create more money than they physically have as they lend out a portion of the deposited funds. So, the reason I wanted to bring this up and educate you on this, and don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you to not be with a bank. I mean, we pretty much have to have bank accounts, but um, I just want to show you that all businesses, including banks themselves, have to do certain things in order to um, get the business running smoothly. I'm trying to pull up this. There's a chart if I can make it bigger. Um, and you guys can't see this, but it basically talks about where somebody deposits $1,000 in the bank and they keep $100 on hand and they loan out $900. So when banks are in the billions as far as market cap goes, or the bigger they are, the less potential there is for them to run into problems of not having enough funds on hand. But just like all other businesses, banks initially have to start at a smaller level. I mean, you may have some banks that are only worth 100 million, 50 million. So I guess I say all this to say just be careful with what bank you're choosing to bank with. And maybe slip this question into them and try to get them to. I mean, they may try to avoid telling you, but it'd be a good thing to know sort of where your own bank stands on this sort of thing, or but just know that if you ever try to access all of your money at one time, you might run into problems. Um,
Well, I don't know if you knew, since COVID, the Federal Reserve removed the reserve requirement. So banks are no longer required to keep a minimum amount of deposits on reserve. Most still do for safety, but now they don't even have a minimum requirement.
yeah, no, I'm glad you reminded me of that. I think I remember reading that somewhere where you said that went away with COVID.
Yeah, in 2020.
Yeah, yeah, no, that sounds like that checks out because I remember seeing something about that. But the reason I bring up federal, or there I go saying federal again, fractional reserve banking is because prior to that elimination, this was the system. But yeah, I guess as Tim said, now they don't have to, at least not legislatively, have to keep a certain portion. But yeah, it would be unwise of them not to, because I mean, you think about your own bank account, it's good to invest, but if I invest every dime of my money and I no longer have any money in my bank accounts, then what's going to happen when it's time to pay bills or it's time to pay the mortgage?
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin. If technically, if you whatever money you put in a bank, you're putting at risk because technically you're investing in that bank anyway. Just storing your money there because, uh, you know, however long down the road, if you go over there and they can't give you your money, there's really nothing you can do about it, right?
Yeah, I'm honestly not entirely sure what options you have. So you might be right. I'm not sure what options you do have as far as if
And
they.
my whole point of that is really even depositing your money just for them to hold is a risk.
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Well, when you're doing that, you're basically giving them access to your money for them to have financial gain off of it. And when you could, you know, I think it's smart to keep some savings, but a large majority of your money should be invested into something, whether your cup of tea is stocks or if you want to put it into some kind of retirement fund. Uh, have some safe reserve ready, emergency fund. Going back to Dave Ramsey, but also don't just put all of your money into the bank where it's not growing any interest and just kind of sitting there.
Yeah, there's a famous saying, and I can't remember who quoted it, but he who understands interest earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So, and that banks are one of the best examples out there of that. If all you do is have a checking account and or a savings account, they're going to give you your little tiny interest, whatever it is, and it's generally not even going to be enough to keep up with inflation. And they're going to turn around and loan it out for double or triple, or we think about things like mortgages and loans for people with good credit that are small interest rates, but another area that people don't think about as often, and I think as we talked about in a previous episode, is these banks get involved also in lending people money for their car, or like when they go to get a new vehicle. So
That quote is not from a person who you would think of, but it's from Albert Einstein.
huh. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought it was Albert Einstein. That's interesting. Um, but yeah, that you know, banks have other options too, to where they can get, because sometimes car loans, if somebody has bad credit, that interest rate might end up being anywhere from 15 to 28%. So, and the bank might just be giving you 3 or 4%. So again, I'm not saying all this to say, go take all your money out of the bank. I mean, we all need to use banks, but just keep in mind that all your eggs do not need to be in the same basket.
Well, and you got to keep in mind, business is business. These people aren't out there loaning money and giving you a place to store yours just out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah.
They want to make money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that describes all businesses. They're not, a business isn't, it might provide you a product or a service, but
And technically, look, if this is the way you want to look at it, I mean, you may not look at it this way, but it's something that helps me. You're giving an organization your money to loan out to other people so they can make money off of it. We're basically giving somebody else our money to invest, and whatever money is made off of it, they keep, and we just get our money back.
yeah. Yep. Um, and I pulled up in another window, and this, I assume that the FDIC insurance coverage will help you in the event that even the bank goes out of business or whatever. But standard FDIC coverage for an account, I think, is around $250,000, according to what this is saying. So I don't. I would like to think that in most instances, your money isn't just going to go up in flames if something happens to the bank because of this. But
And read that last sentence there in that overview.
this means if you have a checking account, savings account, and a certificate of deposit at the same bank, each account is insured up to $250,000. Yeah, so that's a valuable piece of information too.
Yeah, because I used to think that it was just up to that certain amount for whatever money you had in the bank.
Yeah,
But apparently,
that's what I thought.
they say that it's not. And again, take all of this with a grain of salt, because if something catastrophic happens, I don't even believe that this is valid.
Yeah. I mean, the other part of this conversation that you have to talk about too is, people think of something like the U.S. government as, or some people do think of it as incapable of failing. But if the government itself can fail, which governments have in the past, I mean, you've got the Roman Empire, you've got Somalia, and
Yeah, the same government that's $37 trillion in debt can't fail.
yeah. Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people get caught up in this group think, and they think, because we currently live in a very powerful country, that it can all come crumbling down. And I'm here to tell you it can.
That's right.
That's another thing that the military taught me, is that governments can crumble. And they've intentionally been crumbled at times too by other powers. But anyway, yeah, say all that to say that even with FDIC coverage, you're always taking some sort of risk. There is never a complete elimination of risk. That's just life. Risk is a part of life. Um, but society encourages us for some reason to fear risk, which I hope that over time I can get you out of that frame of mind. Those of you listening, but because like I said earlier, any day that you walk out your door, could be the day that God decides is your last. So need to always be ready. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you need to hoard up like a prepper, but it's good to have certain safeguards in place.
Well, and at the same time, that's the reason that the Lord tells us not to love money, that we can only love money or we can love Him, and that our true happiness comes from serving Him. And we don't need to, the Bible tells us not even to worry about material things, but to put all our trust in Him.
Yeah. Yeah, you can tell all throughout the Bible that God is really not a big fan of material things and money, but he understands that because we struggle with faith, he knows we're going to do certain things anyway. But that's not to say that he likes them. Um, let's see. Oh, another thing I wanted to talk about today. Well, I guess let's see. Um, hey, has anybody heard anything else about no tax on overtime or tips and all that kind of stuff?
I know that it was a promise that Trump made. I'm not for sure that it has been implemented yet, but I know it's a promise he made.
Yeah, I was gonna say I did a little bit of research and it sounds like they have not done that yet. And part of that research was seeing some articles that have uh, been blasting them because they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, it's been passed by the House, but not by the Senate. So target start dates like late this year, early next year to be implemented.
Okay, so it is at least still on
Yeah,
the
it's
agenda.
been through the House, and I would hope that we'd push it through the Senate quickly, while Republicans have the majority. But
I saw another article the other day too talking about how they were trying to do away with an inheritance tax, which I'm sure is going to make some people mad. But I mean, I if you're here's the thing: if you're in favor of anybody being taxed and penalized, then you also have to be willing to accept that on yourself. So if hearing something like that makes you mad, then it's time to turn the mirror on yourself too and say, all right, well, if it was me and I was leaving money to somebody, would I want a big chunk of that to be taken away by a government that's going to squander it? You know, I, if you look into at least the history that my generation and before me was taught in school, which I don't get me wrong, I know not all of it's completely accurate, but part of the idea, my understanding anyway, with the founding of this country is that, um, the general idea was to be as free as possible and to have a very little tax burden. I think was one of the founding principles of the nation. Um, and that brings me to another thing that I wanted to bring up that I don't think I've brought up yet on the podcast, which is, in my opinion, the easiest thing to do. And I doubt we'll ever do this because too many people make money from not doing this. But I don't see any reason why we can't just all agree on like a flat tax rate, like 10%, 15%, something like that. It'll likely never happen because of attorneys and accountants, and they have so many different ways to profit off of things being confusing. But to me, initially, it would probably harm the revenue that the Treasury collects, and that might, near term, it might be a little complicated, but over time, if you burden businesses less and they make more and more revenue, well, the government's 10% cut is going to grow larger simply because those companies are now burden less and collecting more revenue. So you don't have to make tax rates ridiculous. You can enable you, and you should enable people and businesses to flourish, and then the government's going to be able to take more of that anyway. So for some reason, and I guess it's like I said, because there's a lot of ways as an attorney or an accountant to make money off of it. For some reason, we love to muddy the waters and make our tax system super complicated, but it's, to me, it's foolishness. I mean, it's complete foolishness. There are plenty of other areas of the law that attorneys and accountants could be practicing. I don't think it needs to be taxed. I think we could, whatever negative impact making a simple tax system would have on attorneys and accountants, it would create a mass benefit for the vast majority of society. And those attorneys and accountants are still going to have other areas of the law that they can work in. But that's just my opinion. Anybody have an opinion on that? Crickets that time. Yeah. But yeah, attorneys. I'm sure I have 1,000 things that I'd like to say about attorneys, but they can be good, but they can also be problematic for the economy as a whole. So we all need attorneys, right, for different things, like to make a will and all these things that they can help us with, create new businesses, create documents. But just like anything else, anything can be overdone, including attorney powers and what they do, and that includes legislation too. But yeah, I think things could be a lot more simple than they are without doing a lot of damage. Anyway, we started off talking a little bit about the military industrial complex. One of my talking points was politicians and corruption in DC, so that sort of goes along with that. Let's see. Anybody got anything else to say on the topic of DC?
On the topic of Washington D.C.
Yes, sir.
Oh, where do we start?
Yeah, there's a ton to talk about on that topic.
Well, a thing that is important for us to understand is things like the national debt. When we elect our representatives to go there, that enact these laws that put us in this debt, we're technically responsible for it, and we can complain all we want to, and I think that we should, but we've got to be careful. That's one of the reasons we have to be careful who we send there, because technically we're responsible for putting them there to make those decisions.
Yeah, no, we always have to point the finger back to ourselves some too, and that's why it's so important for people to learn these things, is because we don't, nobody ever likes to blame themselves, but yeah, we all play a part in this, and if the country does collapse, it will be all of our fault. Who some people don't even vote, and don't ever let me know that you don't vote. I'll go off on you in front
As
of
you
the police or anybody else. I don't care. So don't ever tell me that. Everybody should be voting, and you should take your vote very seriously. People for some reason get caught up in this line of thinking that what's my vote? My vote doesn't matter. I can promise you it does. So we just all collectively need to, and I'm talking about both sides. I'm not being partisan here. Both sides, we need to do more research and take much greater consideration into our decisions on who we're going to vote for. I guess we can, let's see. I guess we can sort of get into the scripture section of this now. Let me find it here. I'm going to read off the old, I think I'm in the old King James version of this. Let me see real quick. Yeah, I'm gonna read this off in original King James. Well, there's a few. Well, no, I do need to do King James because of this sepulcher word that I or sepulchre word that we were talking about earlier. Let me start down here. So part of the scripture is for, at the time it was Pharisees, and today, church, you could say this would be for church leaders too. But I'm gonna save the first piece of this for when Ryan's with us. I think Ryan's gonna join us on the next episode. So I think we'll start with lawyers today. So if you go to Luke 11 and you come down to verse 45, it says, "Then answered one of the lawyers and said unto him, Master, thus saying thou reproachest us also. And he said, Woe unto you also, you lawyers, for you laid men with burdens grievous to be borne, and you yourselves touch not the burdens with one of your fingers." And what I think they're saying here is, he's saying that you create burdens for people, but you don't use a single finger to help them with those burdens. So to me, this is his way of talking about how even attorneys back then would muddy the waters and just make things unnecessarily confusing and burdensome on people. And then it says, all right, we're at verse 47 now. "Woe unto you, for you build the sepulchres of the prophets, and your fathers killed them." And I had to look up what the specific definition of sepulchre was. Chris, do you know much about sepulchres, or have you ever been to one or seen one?
Just a large church with a steeple on it.
Yeah, I thought I saw somewhere something about it was like a burial, like a holy burial site or something.
Maybe so.
Let me see if I can pull up the definition instead of the pronunciation. Yeah, so a small room or monument cut in rock or built of stone in which a dead person is laid or buried.
Well, there's a lot of dead people in churches. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, so back in biblical days, I'm sure sepulchres probably used to be far more common than they are now. I mean, most of us just bury people in the ground. But I mean, there are some places that still bury people above ground. But anyway, it says, "For you build the sepulchres of the prophets, so the graves of the prophets, and your fathers killed them. Truly you bear witness that you allow the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you build their sepulchres." So now that we're at 48, I'm going to switch back over to New King James so that we're not all super confused here. Because reading in older language styles can get a little overwhelming at times. But wait a second, that didn't change it. All right, so if we pick up at verse 48, it says, "In fact, you bear witness that you approve the deeds of your fathers, for they indeed killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore, the wisdom of God also said, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute, that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the temple. Yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter in yourselves, and those who were entering in you hindered. And he said these things to them. The scribes and the Pharisees began to assail him how do you, somebody say that word for me?
Vehemently.
Vehemently, and to cross examine him about many things, lying in wait for him and seeking to catch him in something he might say that they might accuse him. So I know there's a whole lot of meat in there. So I'm sure I know Chris, you've probably got some thoughts on that.
I'll be honest with you. I was looking at another segment that we were that we were had already talked about.
Oh, what segment were you?
I was looking, and this is completely off the subject, but I was looking at tax rates and how they had risen from a specific time in history. And I apologize for jumping topics again, but we were
No, it's all good.
in 1917 when the First World War started. Individual tax rates all across the board were 16%, regardless of what you made. That was in 1917. So from that time until now, that's how much the rates have risen.
Yep. So, you know, that makes me feel like my view might be accurate then about the flat tax rate, because at least in that time period up until the Great Depression, my understanding is the economy was, I mean, booming to a crazy level back when taxes were that low. And I mean, yeah, if you look at it from, I guess, the Industrial Revolution on, at least up until the Great Depression, and then shortly after, the world went through all kinds of crazy new technology and different booms in different sectors. So part of the reason I wanted to discuss this and attorneys and accountants today is because basically what I'm telling you is that a lot of, and at least in my opinion, a lot of the economy is being held back by attorneys and accountants. But
And what he's saying here is true across the board. Now, this was, keep in mind, this was Jesus administering the lawyers
of the day,
2,000 years ago. Now,
yeah,
also keep in mind that when you're talking about lawyers at that time, you weren't talking about the kind of lawyers we're talking about today.
yeah,
These are lawyers who knew the law, which was the Mosaic law, which were religious people. And they also, but the decisions that they made across the board were the same as what you're talking about today. Basically, they had no problem putting a hindrance on people as long as it didn't affect them. And as you can see, that has been transported all the way to our day to our lawyers, who were just doctors of law or court law, who basically do the same thing. When they take that mentality to Washington to make decisions for everybody else the same way that they've been taught to do it in the law field, and what you said is exactly true.
yeah. I mean that, and that's, this sort of goes into that whole separation of church and state thing too. That kind of like Chris was saying, back in the day, church and law used to be, if I'm not mistaken, not separate at all. Is that right, Chris?
No, that's correct. However, and again, when it mentions a lawyer in the Bible, it's talking about those who were very learned about the Mosaic law, the religious, not the politics of the day.
Right. Yeah, no, but what I was getting at was, there was no separation between the two back then. It was just
Yes, yes.
yeah, it was just
In fact, I mean, Jesus said, "Render to Caesar what Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And even the Lord knew that there were going to be certain times when men enacted laws that required payment. Uh, and he expected us to hold true to those things. Guys, if you're out there cheating on your taxes, skirting things that you shouldn't be doing, know that that is sinful, just like disregarding one of Jesus's very own words. Because the Lord told us that He put those in charge. He put those who are over us in charge, and we are to be subject to them in the things uh, that they're in charge of.
yeah. No, you absolutely should follow the law, and all highly successful people are going to follow the law, but one thing that the very successful do differently is they do not allow tyranny to affect them as much as many of the rest of us do, which is why you see powerful corporations with a whole lot of their own lawyers. It's because, there's a difference. And I agree completely with Chris in that we have to pay our dues, both to the church and to the government. But, um, you have to get to where, and I mean, like what we were saying a minute ago, things need to be fair. You don't give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but if Caesar is a tyrant, then somebody's going to take him down.
And Kevin, if we kept our spending in check, which I believe is what Doge is trying to do, if we kept our spending in check and we had a flat tax across the board of a certain percentage, no matter what you make, we would be good. We would be fine. We'd have plenty of money to do things, but things have to be done fairly.
Yeah, yeah. I just don't, for the life of me, I don't understand. Well, I guess I do. It's what we talked about, why we went away from that, because it gives a lot more business to modern day attorneys when the waters are muddied. Um, and today, if you're like, I feel like Kevin's just bashing lawyers. Well, yeah, I am. A big part of today was bashing lawyers. So, it's not that I don't like you guys and I'll need you in the future just like everybody else does, but the
Don't
title,
be greedy. Be fair. I mean, how it's not. It's really not that hard.
yeah, and the title of this episode of the podcast today was "Woe unto you," which is, I think we'll get into that next time. The start of this whole section of the Bible, I think, starts off with "Woe unto you." So as Chris said, yeah, this was a warning for mainly for religious leaders of the time, but uh, because religious leaders were also responsible for legislative issues, I would say that this applies to
Yes,
what,
religious leaders at that time really controlled every aspect of life, whether
yeah,
it was
yeah,
religious or secular. There really was no distinction between the two.
yeah, that's my understanding too. I guess the distinction is recent history for most parts of the world.
That's right.
Um, hey Tim, what time are we at now?
Right at an hour, about 59 minutes.
Okay. Let me double check and make sure there's not anything else that I had listed. Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered most of what I planned on covering. Anybody got anything else?
I think I'm good.
All right. Well, Tim, I guess you can go ahead and end the recording.